Hey, welcome back to God's Glory and Men's Real Stories. I'm your host, Robert Moore III, and I'm excited that you would join us today for another great episode. If you're new to this community, I want you to know that you matter here and your story matters no matter what chapter you're in. So today, I want you to sit back with a community that cares about you and hopes that you feel God's love, as well as see God's glory in men's real stories. So my special guest today is a brother who played and continues to play a role in my life, in my journey, and my growth. And his stories helped me see I wasn't alone. Then he had the nerve to sidestep my original plans to have him here at this table for an opportunity to play a role in a larger story in many others' lives. So I'm excited to finally welcome my brother, Dan Horner, to the episode.
It's good to be here, Robert.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I always have these moments where I'm like, man, I can't wait to have this guy or I have this guy. And I would be lying if I told you I didn't have like a list of people that I'm like, okay, I really want to sit down and talk with these guys. And you're one of those people because you did play a huge role in my life. So I want to let you start off by just introducing yourself to my audience just so they can know who you are outside of how I know you.
My name's Dan Horner, and you and I have a lot in common in that we both have stories. We came out of broken situations, like so many of the people I'm sure who are listening to this podcast. I'm just a guy that's to the very best of my ability trying to follow Christ, and I'm trying to walk the path, as you and I know so well. There's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path with Jesus.
Yeah.
And, it came to a point in my journey where I'd come to faith. I was in church. I was trying to do all the right things. But I came to the place where I'm like, there's got to be more to this Christian life, this story. And, I message entered my story through the book Wild at Heart, and it changed my story. Like I said, Robert, the thing we say is like, I knew God wanted to address my sin. I didn't know he also wanted to address my story.
That's good.
And in that's what changed my life. I like to say, salvation changed my soul, but, God entering into my story changed my life.
Right.
And so that's kind of who I am. I'm a marketplace guy. I am, as far as vocationally, I've been in the residential real estate and home building industry for 33 years, and I believe that's a vocational calling is as ordained by God as a pastor, I've come to understand. And so I love the platform the Lord's given me in the marketplace, and we use that in many, many ways. But I'm just glad to be here. And I'm glad to be a part of this podcast.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And you just said so much there. Like, like I'm sitting there like, ping, there it is. No, ping, no. But I love how you just said that your ministry was stepping into something around the home marketplace. And so a lot of people, when they think of ministry, they immediately go to the thought of like, okay, well, that means there's got to be a pulpit involved. Mm-hmm. There's got to be maybe a robe, maybe a microphone, there's, should I be a bishop or should I be a pastor? Or how does this look to me? And I love how you just kind of said that is my ministry. And in my ministry, that gives me the opportunity to meet people in the market, in the home trade. And that gives you the opportunity to be able to share with people your love and your light. And so when you, was that initially always your plan? Like when you first started off, and I love how you said God comes into our stories, but when your story was being written initially by you, what was the initial plan?
I love that. That's good, because it is when the story is be written by ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Hey, I was born and raised in a small Midwest town, and, that was great in many ways. But in the midst of that, I went off to college. I went to Purdue University and met my wife and started that young life journey after college and got married and started to have kids and, it was kind of like playing the career mindset. And I got to provide for my family and, I want to be good at what I did. When I wasn't raised in a Christian home. So I had no faith foundation to build on. The foundation was that I knew I was a sinner.
Right.
I knew it. I mean, nobody had to tell me. I mean, seriously, nobody had to tell me. But it was, through circumstance and through like FCA and those type of organizations. I was in sports and, influences of coaches. And then ultimately a girl I wanted to date really bad. Well, her father had come to a radical transformation of faith, and he had been a literal like motorcycle gang guy. He was 6'4". His name was Jim. Had really dark eyes and a big black beard, and was intimidating as all get out. And if you wanted to date his daughter, you had to go to church Wednesday night. You had to go Sunday morning and Sunday night. So those were the criteria to go out with his daughter.
Wow.
Well, I wanted to go with his daughter bad enough that I went. Well, during this time, my parents were going through a divorce. And so it was kind of like this environment where God knows he can kind of move in. And I was attracted not only to her, but I was attracted to the stability of their family. And I love the fact that like, hey, we do something together. And so I kind of entered in that, and long story short, I heard the gospel, and I was like, yeah, I am a sinner, and I believe that God is real. I believe that Jesus is who he says he is. I believe hell is real. I do not want to go there, and I know that that's where I'm headed. And I came to faith. And honestly, and this is the answer to your question, was I really did believe that in coming to faith, like I was supposed to become a pastor.
Right.
Like in my mind, it was like, oh, well, if I'm going to walk this journey, I guess to serve God means you're in, I didn't even know 501c3 non-for-profit ministries. I just knew church, right?
Right.
And so, but I didn't like feel it, it didn't feel like, oh, I just want to go and be a pastor. I was more skilled in the marketplace.
Right.
I had more of a mentality around business and growing things and advancing things. And so in all sincerity, I kind of felt guilty for years about I was supposed to have been called into the pulpit and I didn't do it. And so what I really discovered, so your process is I discovered through time, but God's like, oh no, you're exactly where I wanted to place you. And what I've come to realize is that I believe in many ways the marketplace platform that the Lord's given me, my business partners and others that I work with, in many ways is more transformative of an opportunity than within the traditional church context. Because when you're dealing with people with work and you're dealing with, how they interact, well, you can enter in that to the workspace. Say, that's not working.
Right.
That anger thing that's showing up, that doesn't work with your teammates.
Right.
It may work with your spouse because you don't have to deal with it, but in the office, you got to deal with it. And so this opportunity to enter in, but over time, what I really did learn, and I believe to be true, is that an organization that's led by people who follow Jesus, it should be different for the people who are in that organization. And an organization that's led by people who follow Jesus should be making a meaningful impact in their community. And so we, through True Homes, which is our company, we have kind of gone on this amazing adventure with God as that is unfolded. Our vision before we started the organization was to provide people the opportunity for more life. And you say, well, I thought you were a home builder, residential developer. Where we are, we're large scale one, but we're in the people business.
Right.
And, our vision, people say, well, where'd your vision come from? I said, well, there's this guy, his name is Jesus, and he said that he came to earth that we might have life and have it abundantly. So we want to be a catalyst to provide people that opportunity to experience more life. And so it's a biblical vision. And I really believe that Jesus gave my business partner, Mark, and myself that vision. It's his dream. Have you ever heard the book Dream Giver? Have you ever heard that? It's just a little book.
No.
Okay.
Who's it by?
I don't even remember.
Okay.
It's a really small, thin book, but it's good. And the premise of the book, the main character, his name's Nobody, and he's from nowhere. And he wants to be somebody from somewhere. And he wants to go in this journey, but he doesn't know how to get there. And so the dream giver comes to Nobody from nowhere, and he gives him a dream. And he starts to pursue this dream with the dream giver. And so as Nobody from nowhere starts to become somebody from somewhere in this journey, the dream giver comes and he says, hey, I want my dream back. And he's like, no, it's my dream now. He's like, no, I gave it to you. But the dream giver says, but it's mine. And so ultimately, he has to give the dream back to the dream giver. But in the midst of that, what he needed to learn was it wasn't his dream. It was God's dream that he gave him. And so when I look at the calling into the marketplace for myself, that's how I view it. It's Jesus had a dream of how he wanted a business to be run, and we're just trying to make that dream possible. But it's his dream. And, I like to say that as an employer, that many organizations will address, hey, the work of your hands, the productivity, you got to produce something.
Right.
Many people will address your thinking, like, hey, we want your best thinking, Robert. But I think what we've done and what we've come to know is we just don't want the effort of your hands, and we just don't want the thoughts of your mind. We want your heart. And so learning to really go after people's hearts in a real tangible way is God's work.
Yeah.
And you and I both know that, God says above everything else in your life, watch over your heart.
Guard your heart.
But man, we live in a world that just is pounding on it, pounding on it, pounding on it. And it's more and more, faster, faster, run here, run there. But what if there's an organization that says, hey, your heart matters?
That's cool. That's really, because at that point it changes the way automatically my perspective of how it looks when I step into the place. Because if my heart matters, there's so many things that I need to make sure that my heart feels. And so in addressing those things, it changes the perspective of how people come to work.
It is. And that's what we say. And so we talk about love. I mean, we operationalize love in the workplace. And so you say, well, how in the world do you do that? Well, I'll give you this example that our literal brand is it's all about you. It's an other-centric brand. Well, why is that? Because God tells us to care about our neighbors, and it's an other-centric God that we serve. And so I gave this example. I said, hey, Robert, congratulations, you're on our team. And it's all about you at True Homes. You're like, yes, man, finally, I've come somewhere. It's about me. And I say, yeah, it is about you. But if you just make it about you and you don't see that you're part of a community, then it ends with you. So my intent to make it about you ends with you. And so when we launched this concept to make it visual to our associates, I had you come up and we would have done that. And then I invited some more people up. And then I said, hey, Robert, congratulations. You're in this great environment and it's about your heart. We care about you. We love you. And it's all about you. I'm going to focus on you. And you're like, yes. But then you turn around to the person next and you say, hey, guess what, John? I'm going to make it about you.
Yeah.
And then John says, oh man, that's awesome. John turns around to Sally and then Sally says, finally, it's about me.
Right.
Well, that ends it. Right. That ends
That's
it.
Where it ends.
That's
because
where it ends.
She holds on
She
to
holds
that.
on. So you break the chain. So then I brought in a whole group. And everybody's looking. I said, everybody turn to the back of everybody in front of you. So it's a big circle. So I'm speaking to your back, and I just whispered in your ear, hey, Robert, guess what, man? It's all about you. I'm thinking about you. And you look at the person in front of you, you see the back of your head, and you say, hey, John, guess what, man? It's all about you. I'm focused on you. John says, oh, man. Hey, Sally. And it goes all the way around. I said, that's love. That's the circle. So what happens is ultimately somebody says, guess what somebody said in the back of my head? Hey, Dan, it's all about you. And I believe that's God's unity, right? And so what we've done is we model things like that. We say that, hey, if you're in a community where everybody's like, you got to bring your best version of yourself because you're in it for the circle.
Yeah.
And so we say, bring the best version of yourself every single day. And then we're really into healthy relationships. And so it's what we call a healthy we, teamwork. And then there's this awesome thing we call the strength of us, which is when you're in a community where people are loving on each other and they're making it about others and not themselves, unbelievable things grow in that kind of soil of that culture. And so, we've seen, we've got, and these are like things that matter for a business. You've got we have low turnover. We have industry leading productivity. We have industry leading profitability. We have reward systems that everybody gets to share in. We get to do all this. We get a great healthcare benefits programs for people. We've got all these things that we can do that flow out of that, that Jesus-centered culture, not going around, we're not running around with pounding scriptures down their people's throats.
Right.
We're living scriptures in people's lives. And so they're seeing people living out to the best of their ability with God's grace to do that. And so in the midst of that, that becomes church. That becomes loving people with where they're at. And we do a lot of other cool stuff. But that's how, to answer your question, that's how I've come to understand that God's placed me in this position to minister inside our company. But then there's a whole other thing you and I could talk about. I could talk about for hours. But how then God's taking our organization that's an other-centric organization that's trying to the best of its ability to love on each other and move that into the community in a powerful way. So all of that stuff works together in a pretty cool way.
Yeah. And I love how, okay, so you said that you ask people, or you like people to bring their best selves to the workplace. But we all know that sometimes the best version they have that particular day, based on what they experienced on their way in, what they experienced when they woke up, sometimes is not the best version of themselves that they normally may bring. And so, like, in those situations, how do you meet a person in a space where they're going through a lot, as a lot of people are, and we don't always know their stories, but they're bringing the best version they have at the time to the job, and it may not show up looking as well as we would like. And it's funny because it almost reminds me of how sometimes we may look at people who may come to church, and sometimes we can recognize, like, okay, wow, like this person, they seem like when they came in, they were looking for community, but they brought a lot of baggage with them. And sometimes when people hear or understand a person's baggage, it may not be what they are willing to take on. And so it creates a space sometimes where people push people away. And I know it's not as simple to do that in the workplace when a person comes in with, you know what, a lot happened since I left here yesterday to the point where I got back here today. I found out a lot of bad news, and I'm hoping to still have a community I can come back to where it's all about me, where I don't have to go through this alone. And a lot of times people think, well, when it comes to work, all they want is they just want me to show up and perform. But there's not a lot of places who want to say, hey, look, you know what? Today, it seems like it needs to be maybe more about you than normal, so that we can kind of help you through whatever it may be that you're going through. And, you know, as I heard you talk, I was like, wow, I'm sitting there thinking about my own job. And I'm like, man, like imagine how you would feel if every day you walked in and somebody was like, hey, listen, it's all about you today. I'm excited to see you today. I'm excited that you step foot in this building, because I know that when you step foot in here, when it's all about you, you also remind me that it's all about me. And that's that right there. It's almost like an affirmation to remind a person that they matter. And so, like, I'm sorry, I said all that to come back to say, how do you guys normally, or what do you guys normally, how would you train your teams or your managers or your supervisors to handle those situations when a person comes in and they don't feel like it's all about them today based on what they've gone through?
Yeah, it's a great question. Is, you know, again, I always go back to, how do you operationalize love? You know, how do you bring it into a business environment? And, you know, I don't want to give a perception that, you know, we do this perfectly. Nobody does, right? I mean, that's an understanding of grace and people. But that goes kind of our second thing. Honestly, when you were speaking through all those examples, Robert, I kept going back to, well, what's our mission? You know, like how do we go about pursuing this more life vision? Well, our mission is to be uniquely exceptional in one thing: how we relate with our associates, our clients, our community, our trade partners who are in our case, the vocational trades that are out building the homes every day, and our stakeholders that are involved in enabling us to do what we do. So think about that. You know, we're, you know, sticks and bricks and, you know, earth moving equipment and, you know, hard hats organization. But the mission we have as an organization is how we relate with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so a good example of that would be, you know, coming out of COVID, a lot of organizations, ours included, had to find a way to work remote.
Mm-hmm.
We had to. And so we were able to do that. There's a lot of debate today, right now in the United States, about 60% of the workforce has gone back into a structured environment. About 30%, 25 to 30% are in a hybrid environment, and only about 10 to 15 are purely remote anymore.
Right.
And I think that's a good thing, because I say this is that if you and I don't really know each other, it's different. You and I are sitting here face to face. I know you. I can sense your spirit. I can sense the energy of you as a person, versus if you and I were just looking through a screen at each other.
Right.
It's not the same.
No.
and I believe that we live in an age where people are deeply, deeply desiring to be seen. And to literally have somebody say, man, how you doing today, and mean it and care.
Right.
And so that's a relationship-based aspect of work. And we focus on how do we build relationships that matter in lives of individuals and teams. And through that, I think, we will talk about it's you got to trust that the heart's good. That's one of our, you got to trust that the heart's good. A lot of people come in, they don't trust that people's hearts are good because they've been screwed over, or they've been hurt in their life, right? So we say, hey, so we begin with your heart's good, Robert, my heart's good. Your intentions are good, my intentions are good. Let's start there, right? Having that kind of an agreement. Hey, we want a trusted and trusting relationship.
Right.
And so we got to get to know each other. So we do spend time getting to know each other's stories. For example, one thing that we do, and it's optional because you can't mandate something like this, but we rent out Camp Canaan on the southwest side of Charlotte every year. And we have, now it's become a multiple step path that you can go on, because a lot of people were just saying like, hey, you guys have gone on this adventure. You guys have kind of built this cool organization. Well, how did you guys do it? And we'd say, well, we got a vision, and we had a sense of calling, and, we had a shared mission of how we wanted to approach it. And we had shared values, and we had some core convictions about how we wanted to do it. I mean, for example, we want to be an organization that's in the world, but not of the world. We had that conviction before we started the business, but that's a shared conviction that we have. And people say, well, what does that look like? Well, we can talk to you about what we think a business that's in the world, but not of the world can look like. And so, in the midst of that journey, we created something called My True Experience. And so what we did is it's completely optional, but in many ways, what we're trying to model is the pathway to live an intentional life. And we invite people to come. It's an overnight experience. It's a mini outpost.
Okay.
So the truth is, it's a mini outpost. That's where we got the idea is. Let's let people get away. There'll be some adventure, and there'll be campfire and cigars, and people can get to know each other. But we're going to go into story, and people are going to share their stories, and they're going to get to know themselves better. A lot of self-reflection,
right?
Time with the questions, and they go through a process of first discovery. What does more life look like? Have you defined what you want out of your life? Do you have a sense of if more life showed up in your life, what would it look like? Have you defined it? What are your values that are driving your decisions? How's the balance in your life? How are you doing in these key areas? How's your family, right? How's your financial situation? How's your health? How's your wellness? And just equipping them. And then what we do is we have, now it's a 2-0, 3-0, 4-0, multiple year journey that people go on. And it is equipping them to live an intentional life. And through that, I mean, I loved it last time. We do it in the fall. We do it in October. And one associate said, I learned more about my coworkers in the first hour of My True Experience than I know more about them than I know about my family members.
Wow.
And I just think you got to create a space and a place for things to happen like that.
Yeah.
And we do. We try to create places and spaces where hearts can show up, and people do realize it's not, that thing has nothing to do with work. There's no context to work.
Right.
It's about the individual. And then, we go through, how do you live that journey? How do you live in a community? And then how do you stay on the path? And now that we've done it for so many years, you see life transformation. You see marriages that are restored. People saying, "Oh man, my marriage was messed up. I wasn't leading. I wasn't doing this." And it's not us telling anybody anything. It's self discovery and reflection. And
right,
when I was raising my kids wrong and my priorities were messed up. And I think what happens is when people start to realize the individuals I work with genuinely care about me. It's just not words. It's literally backed up by demonstrated actions. Then you're onto something special, and it's hard. I mean, it takes a lot of intentionality, but we have, now that we've gone through it, it wasn't ever our intent, but now we can say, hey, there's all kinds of benefits to a healthy organization when the soil is grounded in things like that. It's healthy, and human beings tend to flourish in that environment.
Right. No, and you know what? You're so right, because like you said, we spend the majority of our time with coworkers, and the fact that sometimes we can know more about a coworker than we can about our family, because we don't take that same intention to our homes and say, you know what, we're going to do a getaway, but we're not going to do a getaway with devices. We're not going to do a getaway with a ton of different attractions and stuff. We're going to get away with each other, and we're going to reflect on things that maybe we've missed. Things that maybe I've been thinking that I've been hitting the mark, but I am so far off. And in those intentional sit downs where there's no distractions, it allows us, whether it be with coworkers or whether it be with family, it allows us to be able to not only self-reflect, but also hear and give the space for our children, for our husbands or wives to be able to say, you know what? I'm glad you took the time out to actually hear me out, because every time I went to go and tell you this, either you were too tired, you were too frustrated, there was too much going on around you. Now that we've slowed down, it shows that you're pouring back into the family. It shows that you're pouring back into the community of our job now. So no, I love that. That's awesome. So I have to turn it back to you now and say, so what does Dan do to be able to recharge, to be able to be intentional and show up the way you do for so many other people? Because I've realized how important it is, how many people look to us to pour. But then the question is what are you doing to make sure you're full, or what are you doing to make sure you recharge to be able to continue to let people know that you are important here. You do matter here.
Yeah, that's a great question, because when we're younger, we very much operate like a river.
Yeah.
We just got energy. We're just flowing it. It's pouring out, and get up the next day and do it again.
Yeah.
And at this stage of my journey, which I'm getting older. I'm not old, but I'm getting older. As you get older, you also start to realize certain things about pace. And so we are a reservoir. And our souls are, I believe, a reservoir from the standpoint that a reservoir has to be completely filled up. And when it's filled up, it overflows.
Right.
And realizing that is a priority. And so it's the whole package, it's taking care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It's having healthy relationships. Church for me, clearly being in a community, and that's the thing I think that another thing that I really I get concerned about, just at the kingdom of Christ's kingdom made up of churches, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is again, what happened in COVID? Well, we all got pushed to our homes, and it broke up community, and then we kind of created a pseudo community, and people are like, and then we get, I kind of like this convenience. I don't have to get up and go, right? So there was a big difference. Like you and I said, I know you and I, there's a difference by the two of us being together. We're living beings.
Right.
And so I think that even before COVID, people could run into church, do church, hear a sermon, and then run out the door. And there wasn't like deep rooted community.
Right.
And I think we're still very much in that same dynamic post-COVID, because a lot of people are kind of like, well, now I've got the convenience thing too. Like, I kind of listen to a message. But I really believe what's before us as a body of believers globally is there's a deep-seated need and desire for connection and being seen and being heard. And we've got to continue to enter into that. And so for me, church is community. A lot of times people think church is a sermon or church is it's community. And that community of faith that's in my own journey is what's transformed my life. And it's that community of faith of men walking with men for so many years that's changed myself as a man. It's been the community of faith that my wife and I, is from young marriage to now, getting ready to have our first grandchild, right? Those dynamics. But we've walked that with people of faith. And so that's what we keep encouraging our kids, like, hey, we want you to go to church, not because we want you to go to church. And we say, we want you to be part of a community of faith.
Right.
And that's a difference, right? It's having shared values, a shared vision, and then going on a shared journey in life, trying to walk it out with Jesus. And so that's, for me, it's all of those things, it is Bible study, it is prayer, it is meditation, it is physically working out, it's eating right, it's doing those, it's being in healthy relationships. It's all of that. Right. It really is. That's, for me, how I do it. I know other people have different ways, but to answer your question, for me, it's trying to be a disciplined warrior.
Yeah.
You don't want to show up, naive, and you'll have fought valiantly and died quickly, as we like to say. A little bit. You got to be prepared for this thing.
No, you are so right, and even with the talk of community, I truly believe that you're right. Church was definitely more of a community. You're right. We can sit at our homes and we can watch church online. We can watch it through a screen. But it's something about, like you said, showing up, being seen, being able to talk to people and be loved on or love on others. Sometimes feeling the vibe of people and people being like, hey, you know what? I just want to, I've been going through something I want to, and they had the opportunity to be able to talk to you face to face. They had that opportunity to be able to say, hey, look, let's step outside, or hey, look, I want to just converse with you. And it's that part that creates the space for us to give others what God gives us, in the opportunity to be able to feel and experience love, even in sometimes our shame and our guilt and our mistakes and our desire sometimes to be perfect and falling short, realizing that perfection is maybe just a facade, as we say. Realizing that, you can strive for it. But, the truth is that without the community that you created and that you continue to create, because I definitely want to get to that, about realizing that all my life I've been looking for community and I've been seeking it in individuals looking to people, looking to things. And then finally realizing that I was on to something. I definitely knew that I desired community. I wanted somebody to talk about things with, but was looking in all the wrong places. And then I met Dan, and I met you up on the mountain at Outpost in a community that had already been formed, but was like, welcome. We're ready for you to not only understand that there is a path, but we're ready to put you on that path, and we want to walk alongside you. And I know even saying that, it's almost like, not a pyramid scheme. What kind of what is this? Y'all gonna start? What is?
It's Jesus' pyramid scheme.
Right. Like that sounds very. But no, it was a major part of my journey, coming back to God, realizing that in falling apart, I needed help from a community that could help me start to understand how this looks. Because what I thought it looked like, I realized that I had to let that go. Like, I was clearly way off. But being able to walk alongside men who are on the journey, who have been on the journey, and realize that this is bigger than just showing up to church and hearing a great message.
That's right.
This is bigger than just, trying to recognize, like you said earlier, that I have sin and that I don't want to walk with that sin anymore. Because at that point, most people end there. It's like, okay, well, I go to church and I've confronted most of my sin. And I say most of it because there's always those things that sometimes we're like, I'll give all that up, but God doesn't care about this. He's not that bothered by this. But it's not for me to tell you he is. It's that conviction. I've actually recently been talking about like the difference in conviction and condemnation and how there's a big difference. But what do you feel when it comes to men looking for community and not knowing where to go, or especially when you're a faith-based, you're wanting to find a faith-based community? Where do you feel we continue to fall short? Because I hear men all the time say, I've been looking for this forever.
Yeah.
Why is it so hard to find?
such a great question. I think it's hard to find because it's not readily and easily presented in the kingdom and the church today. And what I mean by that is, I was exactly that guy. So in my journey, and we talk about when we were kids, right? When I was a kid, I grew up in the country in a small Midwest town, and man, every day was an adventure.
Right.
It really was. And we had buddies and we had friends, and carried that all the way through high school, and then went off to college and carried that there. And then at some point, life starts to show up. And in my case, it was like, okay, I didn't come from a family that said, oh, hey, no, you got to go to work. You got to make your way in the world now. And I decided to get married. And that was kind of the catalyst moment for me and my wife and our shared faith journey. Like, hey, God had kind of put circumstances together, and we kind of started to both walk the path. She just got on the path because she just came to faith, and she still to this day doesn't think I had gotten saved before. She was like, the dude I knew in college, I don't think he was a Christian. I said, oh, he was saved, but he wasn't acting like a Christian.
Right.
And so we began our shared journey. And in my case, and you know my story, and those listening, most don't, I didn't want to be what I thought a Christian was. Because in my mind, the people that I knew growing up, they just didn't look like they had fun. They looked serious all the time. My wife said, like, where she grew up in Northwest Indiana, like they just wore like the same color clothes every day, and and they didn't wear makeup, and so that's kind of what we were entering into this thing. And I like I said, I knew I was a sinner. I wanted to be saved, and I didn't want to go to hell, and I wanted salvation, but I didn't want to live what I thought was that kind of that stereotypical model in my mind of what it meant to be a Christian. But then as I got on that path, well, guess who I became? I became that guy, because that was kind of what was modeled. Is like, I like to say, the church I went to is a very good church. My wife and I, we grew tremendously in that church. But in that particular culture of that church was saved by grace. But after that, you got to get your act together. You got to get your crap together, because you just suck, man. You got so much sin. It was sin management, right? Well, that's not very attractive. I just constantly, you show up, and all I keep telling you, Robert, is how much you suck and all the sin that you've got in your life. And you need to manage it.
Right.
Well, you eat that crap sandwich for 10 years, and it's not a very good diet.
Right.
And so that's where I found myself. I'd become a religious guy. I was Pharisaical, and I didn't like it. And I didn't have any friends. Like real friends,
right.
Like buddies.
Right.
I had friends that we would go to church and then go, afterwards. And talk about,
right.
But not buddies, you know what I mean? And I remember one day, at that time we were in Indianapolis, and we had gone to church, and we were downtown Indianapolis, and all these people were tailgating before an Indianapolis Colts game. And I remember looking at them, and I was like, man, they got it so much better than I do. They're enjoying their lives. I've got Jesus, but I'm not enjoying my life. They don't have Jesus, and maybe they did. I was just being judgmental,
right?
Of course, right? And saying, but they did. They had laughter, and they had fellowship, and they were, and so that began my journey when I got dry. And I think for a lot of guys, it starts to show up at some point. It could be for somebody, very few, maybe in your late 20s, but a lot of guys in their 30s and their 40s, it's showing up, man, because those things start to matter. The health of your relationships matter, your marriage matters, how you're parenting, how you're dating your wife. Well, those things all show up because you're living life, and those things showed up in my life as well. And it was through really a book. It wasn't even Wild at Heart, the first one. It was John Eldredge's first book, The Sacred Romance, and it basically said that we're part of a bigger story. And I was like, yeah, yes. Because when I was a kid, I loved adventure and books and stuff. I was like, I love Star Wars, man. I grew up in the Star Wars generation, and anything, that was, kind of epic, and I love those stories. And so when John Eldredge wrote that, I'm like, well, you mean Christianity could be a big, like, adventure story? I've never heard a preacher ever preached that one time from my pulpit.
Right.
And my heart just leapt, and it was like, oh, this could be true. And then I remember I was kind of mad at John Eldridge because he kind of put it out there, but it's like, okay, well, how do you go do it? And it was like, like he put you into
left
the
you on that cliff.
Edge,
yeah.
You know what I mean? And so,
right.
so anyway, when Wild at Heart came out and had the opportunity to know John Eldridge before he wrote those books and get to know his ministry. But anyway, in the midst of that, we got a copy of Wild at Heart before it ever came out, and it was in a 3-ring binder. And he sent it to us. He's like, hey, read this. And anyway, so most people don't know John Eldridge was a counselor, and he also worked for Focus on the Family and taught Christian worldview. And John said, hey, I was meeting with men and I was meeting with women, but I looked at men and I've said, something is off in the hearts and the lives of God's men. Something is missing. Something is not being presented. And that's what was the catalyst for the book Wild at Heart. And when he said, listen, man, God's placed some things on our hearts as men. He created us to be part of a story.
Right.
Because we are born into a story. He cares about our story. He knows that we have an enemy that's absolutely just hammering us 24/7, and we're ignorant of the enemy and how he plays out, right? That's why the movie The Matrix, which is so, The Matrix, every person should watch The Matrix. It is the gospel because it's a world we've been born into that's been pulled over our eyes to keep us from the truth that we're all slaves, right?
Yeah.
And so Satan he has us all day long because we live ignorant of that truth. And then he's like, listen, man, you're built for adventure because God loves adventure. I mean, look at the world he's created. It's full of adventure. I'm like, yeah, adventure. I don't have any adventure in my life anymore. I've become serious and boring and, like to say, like I eat Melba toast. It's like a Melba toast Christian life. There's no flavor in it. And, and I said, like, I remember like our church we were at, like, think about the first miracle Jesus did. What did he do?
Yeah,
he made the last round.
Yeah.
He bought the last round for a wedding. He's like, hey, and it's going to be the best. And the church I was in, they literally said, well, no, that was unfermented wine. Jesus would have never created alcohol. And I'm like, and that's why they said, well, everybody's already drank all this grape juice, and so they feel like, no, it's in context. It's clear that Jesus bought the last round because he's in a celebration,
right?
In the Bible, there are all these feasts that the Jews had to go to. It's because he wanted everybody gathering and enjoying life and celebrating. And he created the vines, and he created wine. He created great food, And it's hard for people to believe, God created sex. It's something he gave us. He's a God of pleasures and passions if it's right. And so realizing that he created adventure and he's calling us into an adventure and there's a battle to fight, and we have to bring our strength as men into that battle. And there's beauty in the world, and God wants us to be battling and understanding how to interact with the beauties in our lives. And man, I was like, yes, this is like just a great drink of water. Like this right here is like just a good,
that
tastes good. So then what happened was I just started to ask, it's like how the church grows. You get excited about it. I had never hardly asked anybody to come to my church in 10 years because I knew they didn't want what I had. I knew it in my heart.
Yeah.
I could go and sit down with people I cared about and tell them about hell, fire, brimstone, and all that stuff. But I never said, hey, look at the life. This is a life that you want. But what happened was when I really understood the Bible, what John Eldridge like, hey, who God is and the masculine heart and all these things, I wanted to tell everybody about it.
Right.
So I went to like one of my best friends I grew up with. His name's Aaron. And I said, Aaron, man, you got to read this book. Hey, let's get together at Einstein Brothers and let's get Mitch and let's get some guys. Let's get Chuck in here and some other guys. And we did. And we meet there. And for the first time, we started having conversations as men about faith in ways that we never had within the traditional environment we had been in. And that's nothing. I'm not beating on the church. I love my church. I'm committed to my church. I tithe. I do all things. I believe that the church is God's body on earth. I'm just saying there is something that has to be brought out to get the men from just sitting on their butts in the pulpit to getting engaged in the kingdom.
Right.
And like alive and seeing faith in a dynamic, real way.
Yeah.
And so guess what? Then those guys turned into 10 guys. And then those 10 guys, we went out to a boot camp in Colorado and we saw like, oh my gosh, we saw them all of a sudden, John Eldridge using video clips and things like that. And we're like, this is amazing. So we started the Outpost, as you know, the Indiana Outpost, and then we started the Carolina Outpost as we moved out here, and have seen literally thousands of men get on this path.
Yeah.
And it's a path that men invite other men on, because it's like, I finally found something like gets fire in my belly about my faith, because I think there's so men who genuinely love Jesus, but they just don't know how to get on the path of more life.
Right.
And that's what you and I have discovered together, and that's the community you came into, of real guys, broken guys, with, different personalities, different backgrounds, but we've got unity around the fact that, and people say, well, we have unity around Christ. Well, of course we have unity around Christ, but what we have in unity is we all realize, hey man, everybody's got a story.
Right.
And that's, I think, what unifies that group more than anything. There's no judgment. There's no, have you ever seen judgment flowing up there?
No, it's crazy how everybody realizes, like, yo, you look different than me. We grew up on a different block, but we got the same story. And how could we judge each other when we're both like,
well, you and I got the same story.
Right.
Our moms, right?
Yeah. And I want to actually ask that. I want to talk about that too, because that's something I've never actually talked about here. But like, yeah, it creates a space where not only can we go on an adventure, but we can go on an adventure with men who are sitting there opening up and being vulnerable with you. And it's a gift. They're offering that. And they're not saying you got to give it back, but it almost feels just right to like be like, well, man, if you could just share that with me, bro. I got so much I've been wanting to share for so long that like I would be crazy to leave this mountain and not open up about some of the stuff I've been carrying up here.
That's right.
And I came with a heavy book bag too.
That's right.
So yeah, no, it's crazy how you're right. I left there and I have never been the same, because I can't not tell other guys about it. I don't even have to know you to say, there's an event that you want to go to that, as I tell people, it's a pit stop to your life. And as I explain to people, I have never seen a NASCAR go around a track 500 times without stopping. You got to stop eventually. And let's hope that your pit stop is one that fills you up and is not one where when you finally stop, that's your last stop. Because that's exactly what Outpost did for me. It filled me up. It put 4 new tires on me and filled my gas tank and sent me back down saying, okay, who else wants gas and 4 new tires? Because I realized how important it was to men. So you even said, we were talking about how like all of us, a lot of us, many of us up there, we have stories that resonate with each other. And that's how it kind of creates an environment where it's like, whoa, okay. And we realized even in a discussion one time where your story was a lot like mine, where, as I call it, we both had a mom wound. And, it's something that I'd never really heard a lot. I've always heard about, people and their dad wounds, how their dad wasn't there, how their dad was absent. And normally you don't hear about absent moms, not to say that doesn't exist. But when you hear about a mom in a kid's life or in a person's life, you just assume that, yeah, they were there. They were present. There had to have been a great relationship. There's no other way around it. But I think a lot of times we sidestep it or we overstep it because we do give it almost like grace to say, but they were at least there. So there's no need to like take that Band-Aid off of like the hurt that was left by our mothers, because they were there and they were good to us in a manner of speaking, from a standpoint of like they didn't give up on me, they didn't walk out on me. And I remember one time I was listening to you talk about how even though your mom was good, she gave you all that she had to give you, but even her best kind of left you empty. It left you with holes. And I'm paraphrasing because I know those weren't your exact your words. But I remember thinking like, whoa, yeah, I've never wanted to face that. And I've always just been like kind of like, but she did the best she could, and she did. But there was a lot of hurt. There was a lack of affection. There was a lack of love. And I can recognize, seeing as though me and my mom have had opportunities to talk about things, that a lot of what was meant for me, in a manner of speaking, left out the door when my father left out, but it didn't change. It wasn't like an excuse for like what I still needed. Right. And to hear you talk about that, you know, it was almost like it gave me life to say, okay, so I'm not by myself in this. And I'd love if you just share a little bit about that, just from a standpoint of when men, because I feel like we all, in a manner of speaking, we all love our mothers. That was the one we always look to for the nurturing, for the love, for you know, just that first person we normally looked at when we first came out. Why is it that it even matters that we even address a mom wound?
Yeah, I think because it matters, right?
It does.
And I think as we get into this kind of general topic, I'll tell you a funny story. A friend of mine, as he kind of got on this journey, just this whole concept of woundedness, right? Of, we would say, bondage and brokenness that shows up in our stories in different ways. We find ourselves as men in bondage at times. We find ourselves in broken circumstances and situations. And you know, we have an enemy who just says, man, Robert, it's just you, man. You're just in this alone. You're a screw up, you know, it's just you. And so he wants us to own it and to be ashamed of it, or to just pack it up and put it into a room and just, as men, just walk past it and say, I'm just going to move forward. And that's some of the things that are great about men, is strength. We can do those things, right? And we can function, but it doesn't mean that we're living this abundant life that Jesus says he wants to call us into. And so a buddy of mine, when we got on this kind of starting this path of entering our stories, you know, he said, like, in Wild at Heart, there was a field manual, and we would go through the field manual, and it asked you these deeper questions to ponder as you go through battle, adventure, and all that. But one thing John Eldredge, he takes you into is your wounds, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, I looked in the book, in the workbook, I did everything, but I didn't ever do that section.
Understandable.
Right? Because we say, hey, you know, I want to go on the adventure. Mm-hmm. Hey, I get the battle, man. I want to bring that battle energy and effort into, you know, moving the rock in my life and people's lives. And I get the poser, you know, how we set up these poses, and you did the session on the poser. You were great. Because you're really good at it. No, so we all, every one of us can do that session, because we're all posers, and how we do that thing to hide up something that says I don't have what it takes.
Right.
That's ultimately what we're all doing. We're hiding behind something. We don't want to be exposed.
Right.
And so that whole issue of going into, you know, wounds, bondage, brokenness, it's kind of a room that nobody wants to really talk about. So it didn't really get talked at from the pulpit. And so it's kind of left there. Mm-hmm. And so for me, like many men who have obvious things in their stories, because you can remember when I first got that concept, like, man, I don't have any wounds, man. I wish I had some things that, you know, like sometimes somebody would come from a prison ministry and talk about, oh, I was this, that, and drugs and this, and Jesus delivered me from all of that. And I remember, like, man, I kind of wish I had a story like that was kind of full of God's grace and diciness. And I was like, I don't really have that story. And I had wound envy. I was like, you know, oh man, I wish I had some stories. That's how distant I was from my own story. And maybe there's men listening to this that they're in the same place. Well, you would think that mine was pretty obvious. My mom got pregnant in high school with my brother, and then they got married. Didn't know each other very well. Got married, and then they had me, and then he left, and he didn't come back. And so he left, right? So I'm a guy that, you know, my dad left the home. And then fortunately for myself and my brother, my mom remarried fairly quick, and we were raised as his sons, more me than my brother. And so, you know, for me, even though my father left, I had a dad, right, who was a good dad, who played ball with me and coached and did those things. But it wasn't until, you know, I was 10 years old that I found out he wasn't my dad, because my real dad showed back up in my story. And when my birth dad showed back up in my story, then all of a sudden that started like breaking this foundation that I had of like, what do you mean my dad's not my dad? And so that started this new kind of pattern in my life of I need to perform, because when I realized my dad wasn't my dad and I wanted him to be my dad, that I needed to do whatever I had to do to make sure that I kept him happy. Not that he was asking that, but that's what went into my mind. And so on some ways it was great. I was a straight A student, man. Because my dad loved that. I punched above my weight in athletics because my dad loved that stuff. And so in some ways I'm thankful because, that issue brought about that part of my life.
Right.
But then that marriage ultimately failed, and then they went through a divorce. And so whether you have your birth dad, and divorce screws up families, man. I mean, it's tough. I mean, divorce is tough. And I heard somebody once say, when divorce happens in a family, it's like the orbit of everybody in the family gets thrown out, right? And everybody's now trying to refine an orbit, right?
Right.
And so there's so many things. And so I had all of that, but what I was in the biggest denial about was my relationship with my mom. When I got on this path, I had a surface level. I would have said something Christian, like, "Oh yeah, my mom's great. I love my mom." But no, the truth is, I hated my mom in my heart. My mom didn't like me at all. She thought I was a terrible person, and I couldn't stand being around her. I didn't like being around her. And she's not a bad person. But what had happened in our journey was when the divorce happened in my mom's life, she wanted me to divorce my dad. She wanted me to take her side and everything. And she just didn't see that, you just don't, he was my dad, and so, and I was a young boy. I mean, I was like 15 at this point, 16 years old. And you just don't at that point, you just say, "Oh, I want you to be on my mom told me things she should have never told me about my dad," because she wanted me to go on her side.
Right.
And so that just built years of distance and resentment. And then she got remarried, and she wanted me to embrace this new family and embrace this new circumstance. I didn't want any piece of it. But the other thing that happened was that really, when I look back, my mom was a farm girl with 3 brothers. My mom was a competitive barrel racer, horse barrel racer. And my mom was just tough. And so in one way, she was a good mom to raise boys, right? Like she's like throw you out of the house in the morning and say, "Don't come back." And she, if you broke your arm, she'd be like, "Okay, just put a splint on it, and tie it up and you'll be okay." So that kind of created a toughness, right? A resiliency. Right. But when you go into this issue of like tenderness, nurturing, that tender love, that was not at all ever present in that part of my life.
Right.
And so when you don't have that tenderness and you don't have that nurture and you don't have that love, and some of I moved down here into the South, these Southern boys, they just love their mamas. They love their mamas. Right? Oh, mama. I didn't have that, right? Even before the relationship got toxic with the divorce, but even before that, it was good, but there wasn't warmth there. And what I've come to understand, Robert, is this issue of attachment love. It's a whole theology. It's an understanding of many people now believe that salvation is attachment love. Like we become attached to God's heart. And those of us who've had mother wounds never got that deep-seated attachment, that hesed love of God. And so there's always like something that's not quite in the soil of our soul that we desperately seek, that we want, but we won't really admit it. Because it doesn't feel strong. It doesn't feel, but
right.
But the truth is, boys, when they're little boys, if they want nurture, they're going to kind of go to their mom, right? That's part of that nurturing. Well, that's the heart of God, as we understand. There's a masculine heart and there's a feminine heart. And both hearts are right, and both hearts are God. And for those of us who've had father wounds, that can be a masculine wound. And for those of us who've had mother wounds, that's the feminine heart of God wound.
Right.
And it's coming to understand. And what's interesting, after all these years, John Eldredge's recent book, he started to talk about attachment love. He goes, "I've come to understand that I probably should have been presenting way more of the impacts of a mother wound and the need to have a mother wound healed, because many men have had that wound of just not having that tender heartedness, the warmth of God. And so our relationship with God cannot feel as tender. It cannot feel as caring. It can feel more distant. It can feel more cold. And so, and just sharing that's part of my story. I know that's part of your story. And if it's, any man who's listening to this, if that's part of your story, it matters, and God cares about it. because he has a tender heart.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Wow. Yeah. See, Dan just did what he does well. Like right there, like how he just like every bit of that just kind of like it reinvigorated that thought, that feeling of just like, yeah, but you're right though. Like just knowing that even in the midst of it, we are looking for that heart, because when you've experienced God's love, you realize there's no love like it. There's nothing you have ever experienced like it. It's almost like people say, is God enough? And when you've experienced him in the way I have, and a lot of people have, yes, he is enough. It's more than enough. But in that, and and in that, you're looking to mend the relationships, not just with forgiveness, but with the love that we've received, even when it wasn't there at one time. And that's one thing I've been working to do, to not just, like you said earlier, not just say I love my mom. Oh, well, yeah, I love my mom, but like actually intentionally forgive regularly. Because a lot of people are like, well, did you forgive her? Yeah, but there's times when I may remember something and I have to forgive again.
That's right.
And walk in love and do the things that my mom wants. Like, call me, check on me from time to time. What's wrong with your phone? Your phone not working? But like, do those things and be intentional about doing it. Even when there may be those thoughts that run through your mind, like, well, where was she when you, but it's not about where was she. See, that takes us backwards. Mm-hmm. Moving forward, where am I and what am I going to do going forward when it comes to that conversation, that relationship that I want, not the one I had, but the one that I want, even when it's kind of pushed back, even when they extend their arm and say, well, no, I don't want you that close. That's fine. I'll work my way up,
Well, let me speak to that real quick, because you say something that's important. So in this journey, forgiveness, we always say forgiveness is for our own hearts, really. I mean, because it does release something. And so I'm going to share this quick story because it's relevant to what you just said. So in my journey, I remember with my band of brothers, we're processing our stories in our lives. And I remember literally where I was standing, and a buddy of mine said, so Dan, how do you really feel about your mom? I said, neutral. He goes, that's not normal, just so you know. I was like, but I had settled with neutral, because neutral was a place where there would be no pain, there'd be no expectations, just neutral. Yeah, I'm just going to go to neutral. Well, I got convicted about that and realized, no, I need to go back and I need to try to make things right with my mom. And so I went back specifically to meet with my mom. And I sat down with my mom in her farmhouse in the kitchen, and I said, "Hey, Mom, I just want to say something. I've been dealing with my story and my life, and I just want to ask forgiveness for you, and I want to ask forgiveness for the role I played through the divorce. I didn't handle things ideally. I know you were in pain. I know that you were seeking comfort." And I wasn't there for you in that. And, I was a kid, but I was angry and distant, and I know I hurt you. And so as I laid all of this out, in my mind, I'd already knew how this thing was going to play out. And you're sitting there like grinning too, because I was like, she's just going to say, honey, oh, I am so, of course I forgive you, and thank you. And I need to ask you to forgive me for how I handled all that and what I put you through. And I am not kidding. What she did is she chewed my ass out. She chewed my ass out like I was still 15, 16 years old. It was that current in her heart. So she had still been just carrying all this, and she doubled down on it, Robert. She doubled down on it. And man, I left there, and what in the good godly way of, I wish I was more godly. I'm just mad at her. I'm mad at God. I'm driving back because I'm like, these weren't my expectations. I fell on the sword, man. I thought she. And here's what's so important. A good guy once told me. He said, we cannot make someone who they don't want to be.
Mm.
And I cannot control who somebody is. And we live in frustration wanting somebody to be different. We live in frustration wanting them to be different and do different.
Right.
But we don't control any of that.
Right.
And so what I recognized as I kind of processed that was, in all sincerity, I woke up the next day and something had cleared out inside my heart. Like something going through that process of forgiveness, because I did forgive. But it's what you said and you triggered is like, I have had to forgive and forgive and forgive. And there's times, last time I went home, she had to go have surgery. I came back. My brother didn't come back. Nobody came back. I came back and I took care of her. I've took care of her through 2 cancers. I'm the one who went back and gave for her. And the first thing when I showed up this time, she just on my ass, and I finally looked at her and I said, why in the world are you being mean to me right now? I'm the only person who's come back here to take care of you. Why?
Right.
And it's realizing that just keep forgiving, and then, what I've realized is warmth has re-entered my heart for my mom.
Mm.
So there is a warmth that's been restored. There's a care that's been restored. But what's the key thing is none of that warmth and care towards my mom has been because of what she said to me. It's because of the work that God's done inside of my heart by doing that.
Right.
He's given me that love back and that care and that concern. And then when she hasn't changed, she's the most stubborn person I've ever known my whole life. And I kind of love that about her now. She's had a lot of health battles. I think Jesus gave her stubbornness because she's a widow. She lives alone and she's so stubborn. She's not going to let, sickness. She's not going to let the devil. She's not going to let rheumatoid. She's not going to let anything take her down.
Right.
But there's a price for that.
Right.
And so I love your point is just a reminder that we need to forgive as a structural thing, and then we need to keep on forgiving.
Right. Right. And the beauty is, as you said, she didn't change, but the beauty is that you changed. There were parts of you that even though you were angry in the beginning, you started to realize, wait a minute, that's weird. I feel different about things now. And the change started happening in you. And I've learned that, you're right. People may not change, but sometimes they may be inspired by your changes that invoke the desire for them to maybe self-reflect and say, you know what? They keep coming, even though I keep stiff-arming them back. And every time they come back with more love. And what is my problem? And not to say that would change people, but I feel like we're called to continue to show up with love. And man, if I had time, I'd tell you about a story at work where it's like, I'm still called to show up with love.
That's right.
Even when it's like, they don't deserve this love, but it's like,
well, think about how Jesus feels about all this.
oh yeah. and we always go back to that.
We do not deserve him. It's like the Father's going, I cannot believe. These
Right.
people do not deserve my son. They do not deserve my son.
Right. But he continues to pursue us.
He continues to pursue us. He continues to just bring it on.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Dang. Wow. Well, look, I appreciate you sitting down with me today. This was so good. This was much needed. I love these conversations because as much as I feel like sometimes I'm producing them for others to listen to, I realize that if nobody else ever listens to this stuff, it was what I needed just as much as they needed. So I love every conversation. People are like, what's your favorite? All of them, because I was there. I had like a front row seat. But no, this was great. This is awesome. Is there anything you want to leave my guests with today, even if it's just, how they can connect with you or what you're doing as far as maybe even just more Outpost information?
Yeah. To that point, if you live anywhere in the southeast or within a driving or flying distance, we do the Carolina Outpost. We do it twice a year. Great camp up in the mountains, and it's our motto there is there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. That's from Neo to Morpheus to Neo in the movie The Matrix, and it's so true. And so we would love to just say come out and see what Jesus wants to do in your life, and it'll blow your mind. We have a guarantee. We've always had a guarantee.
Oh, what's the guarantee?
If you show up and Jesus doesn't show up in your life, money back guarantee. We've never had anybody ever take us up on it, but if you show up and Jesus doesn't show up, get your money back.
That is so good, and
Yeah.
you're right. They're not gonna give you your money back, because I will tell you he's going to show up. If you believe that he's going to meet you there, matter of fact, go like I did the first time. I went angry at God. I was angry, and it was like trying to show up for a fight. He better meet me up there. And sure enough, he met me up there, and he met me up there with so much love. It made me forget all about it. Not to say it changed the anger that I had, but it allowed me to have a angry conversation with him, where he met me with love, and he met me with things that he knew I needed for the journey to continue to go. So will I miss one? No. I don't think I'll ever get my money back, but I know that I'm going to spend my money every time, because I know how much I need it. So no, I appreciate you guys bringing that to the Carolinas. And if, like you said, if you're ever anywhere near the Carolinas, which is honestly a flight, even if you're in California, there's no excuse. but no, you should definitely look up CarolinaOutpost.com and definitely check it out, because it's been a huge part of my journey, even to lead me to here, to sitting down, doing what I love doing there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I have a parting thing though for us. You know, there was a time in my life as a Christian, as a man, where I really believed that, you know, Jesus said, "I come that you might have life and abundantly." But I kind of resigned myself that was going to be after I died. Like that's the afterlife, right? That's eternity, and that's true. I mean, we have it. He says we can't even imagine. It's never even entered our mind what he's prepared for us, right?
Right.
I mean, we can't even begin to understand that. So, man, you don't want to miss Jesus. I mean, you don't want to miss what he's preparing for all of us who love him and in our imperfect ways, you know, trying to walk with him and serve him. But here's the thing that I would say is this. He not only cares about your soul, and he does more than anybody that will ever be in your story ever will care about your soul. He does. But he also cares about your heart, and he cares about your life. We're told that above everything else in our lives, we're to watch over our heart, because out of it flows the issues of life. And man, we live in a day and age where there's so much just attacking the heart. Mm-hmm. And I was a guy who did nothing to protect it. I didn't even know that was a concept. Yeah, okay, protect your heart. But you and I both now know what that looks like. We've been equipped, we've been trained, we've been taught up in how to do those things. And so you can live, we all can live. The lie from the enemy is that we can't live a victorious life. And we like to say, live in the victory and take on the battles.
Yeah.
And you get, but there's it's just not a phrase, right? There's a way, there is a path, there's a way to do this. And man, it has absolutely transformed your story. It's transformed my story. It's transformed marriages. It's transformed father-son relationships, father-daughter relationships. It's transformative. And that's the thing, man. That's what Jesus does. He changes stories. He changes lives. And so if anybody wants to get not only their soul saved, get their life changed for in every way for the better, just trust Jesus, man. So save and get on the path. There's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path.
Yeah. So true. So true. I love those last parting words, because it's so true. Well, look, I couldn't have let you go any better than that. I mean, that has truly been a huge part of my journey, a huge part of the path that I have not just looked at from the sidelines and okay, that looks interesting for them. I'll just see if they die first. But no, I truly stepped forward and decided that I was tired of sitting on the sideline, and I wanted to be a part of the journey. I wanted to walk the path. And I hope so many of you that are listening will make that same decision. Not just to say, hey, look, I want to invite Jesus into my life, but I also want to invite him into my story. I want to see the larger story that he has planned for me, and not just the one that I wrote for myself that I felt like was a really good script. So glad you guys could join us today. Man, I appreciate you joining me today. I appreciate you sitting down with me. A lot to unpack later, as always. It's just like, wow, that resonated so much with me. I want to thank my son for making this all possible, as always. He sits in
Yes.
here and just soaks up all of this. I can't wait to hear the book that he writes one day. I know it's going to be an awesome book. I'm just, no pressure. But and I want to thank everybody who joined us today. Hope you definitely come back and join us for another episode on another day at another time. So, hey, thank you so much. Be blessed, and we'll talk to you again soon.
We appreciate you listening today and hope that if you enjoyed this episode, you'll like and subscribe and also listen to past episodes. We hope to bring you great future content as well. Please comment your thoughts on this episode as well as leave any prayer requests below so that this community can pray alongside you. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook at God's Glory and Israel Stories.
Brothers, we understand how the thoughts of even facing your own past and current story and the pain and hurt that come along with this is no easy task. But you're not alone, as you hear in these episodes. Nor has God forgotten you or left your side, as He's in it with you, fighting alongside you through the storms of life. He loves and has already forgiven you, no matter what you have done, and He wants a relationship with you. Your healing, freedom, and growth are important to God and to us as well. Maybe you're considering giving up or need someone to talk to. Here are a few resources that exist that we hope can shine a light into that dark place you're in. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number is 1-800-273-8255. If you need support but are not in crisis, consider reaching out to a warm line with individuals who would love to talk with you. Speaking to someone on these calls is typically free and confidential and run by people who understand what it's like to struggle in life. Find a local number by going to warmline.org.